Good evening, all. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? We will start in a minute. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, now it is exactly 6 o'clock. I think we can start. Last class, we learned Introduction to Health Economics. And today, we will learn Economic Evaluation. Economic evaluation has been defined as the comparative analysis of alternative courses of action in terms of both their costs and consequences in order to assist policy decisions. Economic evaluation involves some comparison between alternatives, which may include doing nothing. This is an important alternative in some situations. We will discuss this when we take one example, and it includes both the costs involved and the benefits that are derived from each of the alternatives. Let me apologize, I have got a sore throat, so my voice may be hoarse. If there are any issues, kindly let me know. Economic evaluation is a technique that is developed by economists to assist decision making when choices have to be made between several courses of action. Although the precise forms of economic evaluation may vary, the cost benefit framework is common to all of them and constitutes the distinctive feature of this approach. Objectives of economic evaluation: to know whether we are making the best use of our scarce resources, to decide between two promising programs when we can afford only one, to demonstrate to decision makers that the benefits of a program are worth the cost. Economic evaluation helps us to achieve these objectives. Now, this is the basic structure of any economic evaluation. We have got two characteristics. One is input and output, also called as costs and consequences, and second is at least two alternatives have to be compared. So, for example, there is a program A and program B, both for the same health problem, but we do not have resources for both of them. So, we have to make a choice. We have to choose either program A or program B. How do we do that? We first analyze the costs of program A and program B, and also the effectiveness of program A and program B. Then we find out the cost benefit or the cost effectiveness ratio, and whichever has got the favorable cost benefit cost effectiveness ratio, that program we choose. So these are common 6 economic evaluations. economic impact analysis, programmatic cost analysis, cost minimization analysis, cost effectiveness analysis, cost utility analysis, and cost benefit analysis. We will learn something about all of them. Why we care about the economics within the context of public health? As public health practitioners, we care about improving the health of entire population. So we have to maximize health outcomes. As financial resources of public health are limited, we have to demonstrate the value provided for the resources that we use. So this is a basic public health model for prevention for any disease. First, if you want to assess the economic impact or the cost of illness of any health problem, first we have to identify the problem. Second, identify the risk and protective factors for that particular health problem. Then we develop a program and policy for that problem. Then program and policy are evaluated. Then we do the economic evaluation. Then we implement and disseminate. So this model can be used for prevention of most of the health problems. Let's understand one by one. First, the economic impact or cost of illness analysis. The cost of illness analysis typically includes the value of medical care resources used to treat a disease and the losses in productivity caused by the illness. Other non-medical costs associated with the illness are sometimes included as well. Examples of medical costs include inpatient visits, emergency department visits, outpatient visits, prescription drugs, medical equipment, and home health services. Examples of non-medical costs include childcare and travel expenses associated with receiving the treatment, and special education costs if the cognitive function is impaired by illness, and such other costs. When assessing productivity losses, we typically use the human capital approach. This method calculates a person's production potential based on the average wages with some adjustment for household productivity. Cost of illness analysis can either be prevalence-based or incidence-based. The question underlying the prevalence-based cost of illness analysis is, how much do we spend each year to take care of individuals with a particular condition? Prevalence-based cost of illness analysis includes the total cost of illness or disease within a specified time period, usually 1 year, regardless of when the disease first occurred. In other words, prevalence-based estimates are a cross-sectional view of cost associated with the illness. But prevalence-based estimates don't tell us how much money prevention can save in the long run. They look only at the annual cost of the disease, not at the cost of the disease over a course of life. In contrast, incidence-based cost of illness analysis calculates the value of lifetime costs for new cases of disease or illness. Incidence-based analysis are essential for calculating the value of prevention. To assess lifetime costs without longitudinal data taken over a lifetime, we may need to model a synthetic cohort of people with the illness over time. In modeling this synthetic cohort, we may also need to assume cross-sectional differences regarding the cost that apply in future years and assume that costs are relatively stable over time. Although the incidence-based cost of illness analysis are better tools for knowing what could be saved through prevention efforts, these analyses require more assumptions and perhaps even more sophisticated modeling techniques than other methods. There are several approaches for measuring the cost of illness. We can total all the medical costs for the population of interest. For example, a group of people with hypertension with complications of hypertension, or we can add only hypertension-specific medical costs for a group of people with hypertension. That means we are not including the treatment costs of complications of hypertension. Only hypertension-specific treatment cost is included here. Or by matching cases to controls or running regression analysis, you can assess the incremental or marginal medical costs for people with hypertension compared to a non-hypertensive group. There are regression methods available to help solve some of the problems associated with data's observable and non-observable confounding factors. When conducting cost of illness analysis, we should avoid some common mistakes. First, If cost data are available from multiple years, we must convert them to the same base year for comparison. Second, in some cases, the market value for some resources may not reflect the true value of resources. For example, there is a monopoly in the market, the price may not reflect the true cost because there is no competition, the prices will be hiked. Or if the government giving subsidy to produce a particular service or a good, then it will be cheaper than the actual cost. The price will be less than the actual cost. So we have to adjust for these things when we are finding out the real cost. Third, when conducting the analysis, we must decide whether costs will reflect the average cost of all healthcare resources for someone with the illness or the incremental cost of healthcare resources when those with the illness are compared to those without the illness. What is incremental cost? We have learned in the last class. Programmatic cost analysis, the second one. Programmatic cost analysis assesses the resources required to implement an intervention or program and the costs associated with the use of those resources. Programmatic cost analysis is also called outcome analysis, cost minimization analysis, or cost consequence analysis. Here I want to mention that though it is called cost minimization analysis, there is another economic evaluation by the same name that we will discuss next. So the difference between these two is the programmatic cost analysis assesses the resources required and the cost of those resources for only one program. Whereas, and here we will reduce the costs by eliminating costs which are not essential for that particular program. That is how it is cost minimization. Whereas in the cost minimization analysis, which we are going to study next, we compare at least two alternatives, and here the results or the effects are same or assumed to be same, and we then find out the cost of the two programs and choose the program which has got the minimum cost. So that is cost minimization analysis commonly understood. So there are at least two alternatives, but here programmatic cost analysis is single program. In a sense, the idea to assess the resources required to implement an intervention, this is typically the first step in economic evaluation, comparing program costs and outcomes in most of the economic evaluations. The programmatic cost analysis includes all the resources required to implement an intervention, such as personnel, space, utilities, travel, materials, and supplies. These costs are important for determining who incurs the cost, the program itself, the participants in the intervention, or the external community groups. Programmatic cost analysis includes financial costs that appear in the budget as well as the economic costs of in-kind services. What is the difference between financial cost and economic cost that we have seen in the last class? A comparison of costs and benefits is the next step in economic evaluation. Here, we assess both the cost of an intervention and the benefit it provides. Assessing programmatic costs can be done at several points within the public health model for preventing disease. If we plan to assess costs associated with the program or intervention while we are developing the program, it is called prospective cost analysis. Costs can be assessed retrospectively if the efficacy or the effectiveness of the program is already proven and the program is already in use. So this is a retrospective analysis. Prospective collection of programmatic costs is preferred because we can ensure that all costs are collected systematically. When we conduct retrospective assessment of program costs, we sometimes find that the data on the collected use of resources were not collected at all or were collected in a way that's not useful to cost analysis. A thorough cost analysis serves as a foundation for conducting other economic analysis like cost effectiveness or return on investment analysis and helps ensure their accuracy. Types of economic evaluations. Commonly, 4 economic evaluations are considered as a common economic evaluations. We have seen 6. So here, 2 things are there. First is cost and consequences have to be considered and at least two alternatives have to be compared. So if both are satisfied, that means cost and consequences are considered and at least two alternatives are compared, then it is called as full economic evaluation. So the cost minimization analysis, cost effectiveness analysis, cost utility analysis, and cost benefit analysis are examples of full economic evaluation. If one of the two is not satisfied, that means only costs are considered or only consequences are considered or only one alternative is examined, then they're all called as partial economic evaluation. For example, if we have only one alternative and we are considering only cost, then it is called as cost description. If we have only one alternative and we are only analyzing the consequences, that is called as outcome description. We have only one program and we have considered both cost and outcome. It is called as cost outcome description. On the other hand, we have two alternatives, but we are considering only the consequences of two alternatives without considering the cost. Then it is called as effectiveness evaluation. And if we are considering cost of two programs without considering the effectiveness of those programs, then it is called as cost analysis. So we will understand these four full economic evaluations now. Before we decide which economic evaluation we are going to do, we will ask ourselves few questions which will help us to decide which economic evaluation we have to do. First question is there good evidence of effectiveness of interventions being compared? Let's say we have got two interventions and there is effectiveness is not at all proven. Okay, we do not know, there is no evidence of the effectiveness. Then we will only consider the cost because effectiveness is not proven or there is no evidence. So in that case, if the answer to this question is no, then whatever we do is called as cost description. If the answer is yes, then we ask the next question: are effectiveness of interventions equal? Okay, if the answer is yes, we do cost minimization analysis. If the answer is no, we ask the next question: can the outcomes be valued in monetary terms? Okay, if the answer is yes, we do cost benefit analysis. If the answer is no, we ask the next question: can the outcome be measured in QALYs or DALYs? If the answer is yes, we do cost utility analysis. If the answer is no, we do cost effectiveness analysis. So this is how we can decide which particular economic evaluation has to be done. The first among the four, cost minimization analysis. This is generally not recommended and not done, but just for completion, we will understand what it is. Effectiveness of interventions being compared are equal or they are at least assumed to be equal. Okay, most of the results cannot be equal because of the heterogeneous nature of the healthcare market, but still for practical purposes we say they are either equal or we assume them to be equal. Therefore, objective here is to minimize the cost. So we analyze the cost and we choose whichever is less costly. Okay, so two or more interventions are compared here, whereas the programmatic cost analysis, as I have told already, there is only one program and we analyze the cost and reduce the cost by removing the costs which are not essential for that implementing that particular program. So this ignores the primary criteria of heterogeneous nature of healthcare market. Hence, this particular economic evaluation, that is cost minimization analysis, is not generally recommended. One example just to make you understand. So let's say a common vaccine, okay, which is easily available. We decide to take that vaccine, but the choice is whether to take in the PHC, in a private clinic, or a corporate hospital. The vaccine is same, the effectiveness is same. Okay, it is proven to be same. So in PHC, it may be available free. In private clinic, they may charge some 100 rupees, or in corporate hospitals, you have to pay maybe 1,000 or more. So the effectiveness is same, but the costs are different. So we can choose the vaccine where it is easily available and free. So this is just to understand. But anyway, this cost minimization analysis is not normally recommended by the economists, so we will not emphasize much on that. Next three are important, so we'll understand them little better. So next one is cost benefit analysis. So cost benefit analysis compares the costs and benefits of interventions. It standardizes all costs and benefits in monetary terms. Cost benefit analysis allows you to consider all the costs and benefits over time, okay, even those beyond the length of the intervention. With preventive interventions, the costs of the intervention occur in immediate future and the benefits occur in the distant future. With cost benefit analysis, costs and benefits, regardless of when they occur, are included in the analysis. Because all programmatic costs and outcomes are converted into monetary terms, we can also consider including non-health outcomes associated with an intervention. If we can assign a dollar value to an outcome, we can include it in the benefit cost analysis. The examples of these cost benefit analysis is typically used at the executive level of the government when considering regulatory proposals that would be costly to implement but that would have a potentially large economic benefit to the society in future. The examples of these regulatory actions are public health laws such as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Application of cost benefit analysis in public health is of a recent phenomena and now it is being used increasingly. There are two common summary measures used in cost benefit analysis. The first is a benefit cost ratio. To find this ratio, divide the program's net benefits by its net costs. The result is a summary measure that states for every dollar spent on a program X, Y dollars are saved. This type of summary measure is popular with policymakers because it's very easy to understand. If the benefit cost ratio is greater than 1, it implies that the program or intervention produces more benefits than it costs. But there is a catch here. The benefit cost ratio is somewhat misleading. If you have a negative ratio in which the program does not save more than it costs, you can't easily determine whether the negative ratio comes from a negative numerator or a negative denominator. A negative numerator would mean that benefits are listed as negative costs. A negative denominator means that the costs are listed as negative benefits. In other words, it's easy to manipulate how costs and benefits are described to get the ratio that we want. In the same way, the ratio can be manipulated to show a bigger return on investment than really exists, again by labeling costs as negative benefits or labeling benefits as negative costs. A better summary measure for benefit cost analysis is net benefits, derived by subtracting the net costs from the net benefits. In this way, program shows a positive return on investment if the net benefits are more than 0. So this summary measure is less easily manipulated in terms of how costs and benefits are labeled and thus is the preferred summary measure by the economists. Benefit cost analysis is used to decide whether to implement one specific intervention or program, which can be determined if the net benefits are greater than 0. It can also be used when choosing between competing options. In this case, you would choose the intervention with the highest return on investment or the highest net benefits. Finally, benefit cost analysis is usually useful when deciding between the whole set of possible interventions with the limited budget. In this case, the net benefits are determined for all the programs. They are ranked in order of decreasing net benefits and the budget is spent according to the program ranking until complete money is spent. That means start with the program which is ranking 1, then 2, 3, 4, till all the money is spent. You go on spending your budget on that way. Assessing program costs in a cost benefit analysis is same as discussed in the programmatic cost analysis just a few slides before. Assessing program benefits in a cost benefit analysis is little more difficult than assessing costs. Benefits of an intervention or program can be considered direct, indirect, or intangible. Direct benefits are those medical expenses saved because of prevention or treatment of the disease or illness. Indirect benefits are those associated with the productivity gains because of prevention or treatment. Examples of indirect benefits include workplace interventions that can have a direct intent of improving health outcomes but that may indirectly improve employee productivity, satisfaction, morale, and retention. Intangible benefits such as improved psychological health are also important, but because they are difficult to quantify, they are labeled as intangible. The valuing indirect benefits in terms of productivity is done using what is called as human capital method. This is the most commonly used method. There are other methods also: friction cost method, revealed preference, and stated preference. The human capital approach for valuing indirect benefits in a cost benefit analysis is based on the theory of investment. People are viewed as capital investment whose sole purpose is to produce for the society at large. The human capital approach assumes that the workers have a value equal to their earnings because the fair market workplace would not pay workers more than they are worth. The value of their production potential in society is based on the wages they earn, including all the benefits associated with those wages. Some adjustments for their production potential within the household are usually included as well. If a disease, injury, or disease affects the person's productivity, the cost to society is valued in terms of the lost earnings. Thus, the human capital approach is fairly straightforward when valuing the death associated with the disease. The human capital approach would base the value of death on the person's age, sex, and occupation because wages differ by age, sex, and occupation in our society. The present value of future earnings, including gross earnings and fringe benefits, would be adjusted for non market labor such as household productivity. In some cases, we subtract future consumption from this value because these goods and services would still be available in for other members of the society to consume. So, for example, if a person dies early, whatever wages he would have earned if he had lived till the life expectancy of that particular population, okay, that is considered as loss. But he will not be consuming the goods and services which otherwise he would have consumed if he was alive. So that has to be subtracted from, okay, the wages. So that is how, okay, some adjustment is also made. We can use tables with calculated lifetime cost estimates using the human capital approach. Valuing morbidity is a little more complicated than valuing mortality. Simplistically, we would say that the value of losing 5 days from work because of an illness is equal to 5 days of wages, adjusted for fringe benefits and household productivity. But the ability to return to work might have less to do with the disease and more to do with the occupation itself. For example, if an airline pilot suffers a mild stroke, he or she may not be able to return to work. But if a professor suffers a mild stroke, he or she may be able to return to work. So it is more to do with the occupation, not with the illness itself. Returning to work doesn't necessarily mean the same level of productivity. This may be particularly relevant to stroke and heart disease patients. We must value the reduced level of productivity once the person returns to work if we want the real cost benefit analysis. Finally, the person might return to work but in different capacity. The professor may no longer be able to teach in a classroom after having a mild stroke, but he or she could continue to be a productive academic researcher. The limitations of human capital approach. Despite its widespread use, this is the most commonly used approach, but even in spite of that, the human capital approach for evaluating indirect benefits of interventions has many limitations. First, because it's based on wages, it discriminates against low wage earners such as the elderly, the very young, the disabled, and the women. Second, it assumes that the labor market has perfect equality in that people are paid at their true productivity capacity, but there are equal job opportunities is also another assumption, and people get paid the same wage for the same job, These are some of the assumptions in this analysis. But this is not true. We all know that the market is not fair. So this assumption itself is not correct. Finally, the human capital approach values only the indirect benefits associated with productivity losses and does not incorporate pain, suffering, and losses in leisure time, etc., which are also equally important, and they are intangible benefits or intangible losses. So the next method is friction cost method. An alternative to measuring the productivity loss by human capital approach is the friction cost method, which is typically used in European economic evaluations. This method is based on valuing productivity loss in the cost required to replace a given worker and the loss in productivity during the time it takes to replace such worker. You may not find immediately a replacement, so it will take some time, and you have to train them, you have to pay him, okay, depending on the market availability. So all these things are considered as in friction cost method. In case of short-term illness, the firm has no production loss if sick individual makes up for the lost production on their return to work, or if there is a pool of permanent reserve labor that can cover the sick worker. A firm has a production loss if there is a lasting drop in production while the sick individual is away from work, for example, a chronic disease which disables him to return to work for a long time. The sick person's lost production is compensated by the volunteer overtime workers. Okay, so we have to pay their overtime. In reality, unemployment exists in most of the societies, so there is always a pool of workers to draw from, and the opportunity cost of labor is zero after replacement. Hence, the value of productivity loss using the friction cost approach should be less than the value using the human capital approach. In fact, in most of the studies, it is found that this method, 18 to 44% of cost valued using the human capital approach is reported. So next, we will see cost effectiveness analysis. It's a quantitative method to assess whether the costs of an intervention are justified by its effects. Two or more interventions are compared here. Standard clinical question here is, intervention A is better than intervention B, but it is more expensive. Is it really cost effective? This is a question we need to answer. It estimates the cost and outcomes of interventions, expresses outcomes in natural units, example, cases prevented, lives saved, etc. It compares the result with other interventions affecting the same outcomes. We develop a model or computer simulation, or cost effectiveness analysis is carried out parallel to RCT. Data is entered and results are compared. We calculate the average cost effectiveness ratio for each strategy and compare the results. But better than the average cost effectiveness ratio, we have what is called as incremental cost effectiveness ratio, ICER. This is more important than ACER, that is average cost effectiveness ratio. So incremental cost effectiveness ratio is the difference in the cost divided by difference in the outcomes. Let's see one example using this incremental cost effectiveness ratio. Consider a condition affecting 100 patients that can be treated by three mutually exclusive healthcare interventions, A, B, and C. Intervention A costs 3 lakh rupees and increases the life duration of each patient by 3.3 years, that is 30 years for 100 patients at a cost of 3 lakh rupees. Intervention B yields 40 additional life years at a cost of rupees 5 lakhs. Intervention C costs 6 lakhs and yields 50 additional life years for those 100 patients. For intervention A, the next most effective intervention is to do nothing. As we have seen earlier, doing nothing is one important alternative in most of the problems where we do not have the treatment, or the treatment is very high risk, has a high risk, or very, very expensive. So for intervention A, the next most cost effective intervention is doing nothing. The average cost expectancy ratio and the incremental cost expectancy ratio of A therefore coincides and are equal to 10,000 rupees per life year gain. The incremental cost effectiveness ratio of B is obtained by calculating the ratio of incremental costs and incremental benefits compared to the next most effective intervention, that is intervention A. So 5 lakhs minus 3 lakhs divided by 40 years minus 30 years, that gives you 20,000 per life year gain. So this is the incremental cost effectiveness ratio for program B. Intervention B is thus able to save additional life years at a cost of 20,000 compared to intervention A. By contrast, if you are using average cost effectiveness ratio for intervention B of rupees 12,500, that is because 5 lakhs and 40 years. So the average comes to 12,005 years, 500 rupees per life years gain would lead to an overestimate of cost effectiveness ratio because we did not consider that intervention A can generate 75% of the health gain. Intervention B is generating 40 years, whereas intervention A is generating 30 years. Okay, so that is 75% at a cost of 60%. B is costing 5 lakhs and A is costing 3 lakhs. So 60% cost, 75% gain. So that we did not consider if you take average cost cost effectiveness ratio. So therefore, ICER is preferred. ICER should be considered. To obtain the incremental cost effectiveness ratio of C, costs and benefits need to be compared with intervention B because that is the next best alternative available. So ICER for C is 6 lakhs minus 5 lakhs divided by 50 minus 40 is equal to 10,000 rupees per life year gain, which is below the ICER of B. Intervention B should be removed from the choice because the upgrade from intervention A to C requires less additional expenditure per life years than upgrade from A to B. So incremental cost effectiveness ratio has to be recalculated for C now because B has been removed. So comparing the intervention C with A yields an incremental cost effectiveness ratio of rupees 15,000 per life year saved. So this is how we use incremental cost effectiveness ratio, okay, as against average cost effectiveness ratio. Same we will plot in graphical way the incremental cost effectiveness ratio and understand how it helps us. Now, the difference in the effectiveness is plotted on x-axis and the difference in the cost is plotted in y-axis. If the intervention falls in this particular quadrant, that is upper left quadrant, that means it is more expensive because this is cost, and this is less cost, this is more cost, and it is less effective, more effective. So here the status quo dominates. That means if you are not doing anything, that not doing anything is better than this particular intervention, or we have an intervention already which is less effective but less costly also, that should be continued. So here, if it falls in this quadrant, the status quo dominates. On the other hand, if the ICER falls on the right lower quadrant, then new intervention dominates because it's more effective and it is less costly. On the other hand, in these two quadrants, we have a trade-off. That means if it falls on the right upper quadrant, it is more costly but more effective. And if it falls on the left lower quadrant, it is less costly but less effective. Now we have to decide whether to go for more costly, more effective intervention or less costly, less effective intervention. This is decided by the patient's ability or willingness to pay, because the more costly, if the person is willing to pay and he is able to pay, or if it is a government program, if the government can afford and they are willing, we go for this particular option. And if the patient is not willing to pay, cannot afford, he is willing to accept the less effective intervention we go in for this particular intervention. The summary measure in cost effectiveness analysis is the ratio of net programmatic costs divided by the net program effects. Programmatic costs are program costs minus the cost of illness averted by the program. This is very important. We have to remember this. Okay, it is just not the cost of a program, but it is a cost of the program minus the cost of the illness averted by the program. Cost effectiveness ratio can be an average. One intervention at a time is assessed in terms of net cost divided by the net benefits. Two or more programs affecting the same health outcome can be compared in terms of incremental net cost of one program compared to another divided by incremental net effects of one program compared to the other. Outcomes or effects included in the cost effectiveness analysis can be defined narrowly or broadly, although the broad definitions are preferred for decisions bearing on public policy. Narrowly defined effects include those that are intermediate in nature and that may be easier to capture, such as immediate increase in the physical activity or decrease in the blood pressure associated with the hypertension intervention, or such other examples. Broadly defined effects are those that are more final and further removed, such as cases of heart disease prevented, lives saved, or years of life gained. These broad outcomes are more appealing in terms of effectiveness goals for a hypertension intervention. However, we may only have to rely on intermediate outcomes to work with unless we can follow interventions participants over time to find good epidemiological evidence linking intermediate to final outcomes. There is a caveat. A major caveat in conducting cost effectiveness analysis is that the outcomes in the natural units cannot be combined and must be considered separately. Now, this creates some problems sometimes. For example, a physical activity program may have two intended effects: lowering of blood pressure and decreasing body mass index. But we cannot combine these two because these two effects cannot be combined in a cost effectiveness analysis. The summary measure for the analysis would be cost per millimeter of mercury reduction in blood pressure or cost per 1% decrease in body mass index. However, the cost in these two summary measures is the same. Okay, so the ratios are somewhat misleading. This makes cost effectiveness ratios using natural units difficult for the policymaker to translate. So in such situations, they use cost benefit analysis or cost utility analysis. That is much better. One method for dealing with the problem of multiple outcomes, particularly if there are multiple health outcomes, is to conduct a cost utility analysis. In this type of analysis, outcomes are expressed as a health index. This combines all health outcomes associated with an intervention in terms of increases in length of life and quality of life. Length of life adjusted by quality of life is known as the quality adjusted life year, and the complement of that is referred to as disability adjusted life year. In cost utility analysis, we could compare interventions that affect different health outcomes by using quality adjusted life year. For example, when comparing the intervention that affects obesity, nutrition outcomes, and cardiovascular diseases or some such other conditions. The summary measure in cost utility analysis is cost per quality adjusted life year or cost per DALY, disability adjusted life year. Cost utility analysis is used when quality of life rather than the length of life is most important effect of the intervention. For example, a cost utility analysis of cardiac rehabilitation program might focus on improved quality of life versus the cardiac rehab's influence on the length of life. Cost utility analysis is also used when the program affects both morbidity and mortality outcomes. An example is emergency medical services pre-hospital stroke care, which has a long-term effect on the recovery and disability. Cost utility analysis can be used when comparing interventions that affect different health outcomes like cancer versus cardiovascular disease prevention. Finally, cost utility analysis should be used when comparing results to other studies that also employ cost utility analysis as the economic evaluation methodology. Utilities or preference weights are a way to quantitatively describe consumer preferences for good quality of life and subjective measure of the usefulness that results from being in different health states. Because utilities are quantitative, they are measurable and analyzable. They are typically based on a 0 to 1 scale where 0 is considered as death and 1 is considered as perfect health. To quantify benefits in a cost utility analysis, that is, to derive a quality adjusted life year, we need to know the intervention's effect on length of life and quality of life both. Data on length of life may be readily available from epidemiological literature. Effects on the quality of life, however, are theoretically derived from individuals directly as their preference weight or utilities for the health state under consideration. For example, what is the preference for having a body mass index above 35 versus having one between 25 and 35? There are a number of ways to directly elicit utilities. There are methods that rely on specific response method, such as scale versus a choice, and methods that rely on specific type of questioning format, such as asking about certain events or uncertain events. Theoretically, to be considered an economic utility, the response method must be a choice and the questioning format must include an uncertainty. Therefore, the only correct way to derive utilities for health states is the standard gamble approach, although other approaches are also commonly used. So let's see what is this standard gamble approach. The standard gamble approach is based on the conceptual framework for examining decisions under uncertainty. The respondent is given a choice between a less than optimal health state, for example, having a body mass index above 35, and a lottery between two uncertain health states. The two uncertain health states are perfect health and death, can be valued as 1 and 0 respectively. The two uncertain health states don't have to include perfect health and death only. The only requirement is that the certain health state be in between the two outcomes associated with the gamble. In this setup, the respondent is asked something like this. So imagine you have a body mass index above 35 with no other adverse events right now. Now, suppose there is a surgery available to you that would reduce your body mass index to a perfect level, thus giving you a perfect health. However, there is a probability of death associated with the surgery. How low does the probability of death have to be for you to be indifferent between your certain health with a body mass index of 35 and a gamble of taking the surgery which would lead to death or perfect health? The probability or the p-value derived from this scenario reflects the utility or a certain health state under consideration, in this case body mass index above 35. The another method is time trade-off, which was developed as an alternative to standard gamble method. This method is used primarily in health research. The respondent is offered a choice between two alternatives of certainty. The goal is to find the point where the person becomes indifferent between the two alternatives. For example, imagine a person has remaining 20 life years and he has severe angina. For example, see here in this picture, this is a 20 years, is a remaining life year. He has to live with severe angina for that 20 years. How much of your remaining life expectancy would you give up to eliminate your severe angina so that you have a perfect health? Now, this is a question asked. The number of years you would give up divided by the remaining life expectancy. Say here, in this example, it is taken as 12 years. 12 years, okay, he can live without any angina, but 20 years with severe angina. That means he is willing to give up 8 years of his remaining life for living 12 years in perfect health. The number of years he would be willing to give up divided by the remaining life expectancy and subtracting for 1 from 1 represents a utility associated with severe angina. In that case, 8 years he is willing to forego for living healthy. So that means 8 divided by 20, that is 0.4. 1 minus 0.4 is 0.6. So 0.6 is the utility in this example. The next one is rating scale. The rating scale is the most common approach to directly eliciting utilities. This involves ranking alternatives and then placing them on an ordinal scale. For example, alternatives might include perfect health, mild angina, severe angina, and death. This example uses visual analog scale, which is typically horizontal. There are a couple of advantages of this approach. The cognitive burden is lower than with the other techniques, and people are familiar with this technique. There are several disadvantages with this particular approach. First is the anchoring effect, that is, set as the best possible state and the worst possible state is subjective, creating an indexing problem. In addition, we can't make any interpretation about the numbers themselves, such as 88 or 60, whatever the number comes, because of the ordinal scale. Furthermore, people have an aversion to the ends of the scale, so they treat the middle of the scale as one scale and the end of the scale as another scale. There are also context effects. Ranking and scoring depend on not just on the states themselves, but also on the states being compared. Finally, this approach is based on conditions of certainty and not really tied to the utilities or theoretical foundation on which cost effectiveness analysis is based. Now we will try to understand how DALYs are constructed or how DALYs are created. A DALY is a health outcome measure with two main components: quality of life reduced due to disability or lifetime lost due to premature death. So imagine a person is born in a country with this much of life expectancy. The end is here. Okay, the first few years the person is healthy, then he gets a bout of illness here, bout of illness here, illness here, illness here, and at this particular point he develops a disease and disability, major disease and disability, which continues till he dies early. Okay, so the DALYs is disability adjusted life year measured of overall disease burden expressed as the cumulative number of years lost due to ill health, disability, or early death. That means years lived with disability plus years lost, okay, because of early death. Say, for example, a person is born in a country where the life expectancy at birth is 82.5 years, let's say. First 5 years, the person lives perfect healthy. Okay, that means no illness, no disability. But at the age of 5 years, he develops a disability and the disability score is 0.3. Now, how to score these disabilities is a different topic. I will not be dealing with that. But there are readily available disability scores for different health conditions and different disabilities. So in this example, we will take it as 0.3 is the disability. So here he lives for 77.5 years with a disability, because first 5 years he was perfectly healthy, and the score is disability weight is 0.3. So the life years lost is 0.3 into 77.5 is equal to 23.5, which is depicted by red color here. So this is disability adjusted life years lost, 23.3. So in effect, the quality of life adjusted years is 59.2. Though he lived up to 82.5, okay, it is considered as he lived for 59.2 years when we adjust his life by quality of, okay, disability adjusted life years or quality adjusted life years. This is for disability. Now, if we see if there is a mortality, the same person, born in the same country with 82.5 years of life expectancy, dies at the age of 50 years, instead of 82.5 years, and 50 years he is in a perfect health. So what he has lost is 32.5 years, because of premature death. So DALYs here is 32.5 and QALYs here is 50 years. So let's combine these two now. The same person, same country, 82.5 years of life expectancy, first 5 years perfect health, and 5 years he develops a disability with a disability score of 0.3 and dies early at the age of 50 years. Okay. Now, the disability adjusted life years is first 5 years, he has a perfect health, so 0. 45 years he lives with a disability with a weight of 0.3, that means 13.5 DALYs, and he dies at the age of 50 years, that means 32.5 years earlier. So combined, he has 46 DALYs, that is, he has lost 46 years when we adjust the disability and the morbidity and early mortality, whereas he has lived only for 36.5 years of perfect health. So that is how DALYs and QALYs are used. Now, QALY is the link between length of life and health status. Say, for example, the utility of spending X years, this is the number of years, this is the utility per period. So X years, let's say in a state of H1 health, level of health is low, is given by the rectangle OXAB. This is giving you the state of health H1, and he lives for X years. This is the utility. The same utility can be considered. The same utility can be achieved by spending T years of life in a better health state. That is, the better health is represented by OCDE. So OXAB is equivalent to OCDE. So this is how QALYs and DALYs are used. Thank you. If you have any questions or comments, you can write in the chat box, or you can send it to my email ID is given here. Any questions, Poonam? If you can read, if they're there, I'll wait for 5 minutes. Okay, if there are no questions or no comments, I think I'll end the broadcast. Thank you all for patient hearing.